Sunday and still don't believe a word I say. Why do I say that? Because I want you to look it up yourself. Now I know that's not easy because trust me, I've spent hours looking up this stuff. But still, please check it out for yourself. Everything that I'm about to tell you is either available publicly, i.e. you can get it on a public website, or if you pay a small fee, you can get the information that I've got. And believe me, I had to pay a couple of small fees to get this information. But there we go. Now, I'd like to also say at the outset that I am not suggesting for a second that anyone that I'm about to talk about has done or has attempted to do anything criminal. Okay? This is not about that. This is not about smearing someone or throwing accusations around. This is asking some questions and a little bit of a look at how some of the systems that we have in this country work. And I'd like to talk to you about Luke Patrick Graham. This guy. He's just been voted in as the new Tory MP for Ochil in Perthshire South. So, he's replacing Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh, who I'm sure many of you know spoke in the Westminster Parliament many times on a variety of different issues, probably never mentioned independence more than twice, and stood up for her local community in a way that her predecessor apparently didn't. And I'm going purely by numbers here. I don't know whether they did a good job for their constituency, but it certainly seems as though Tasmina spoke in an awful lot of debates more than her predecessor. So who is she being replaced by? Well, she's being replaced by Luke Patrick Graham of Swindon. He's an accountant, and the guy's kind of a bit like Harold Saxon from Doctor Who, and up until a few years ago he doesn't seem to have existed anywhere other than on paper. I found it very difficult to find any information about him. Everybody seems to agree that he's doing a good job, and yet I can't seem to find anything that he actually does. Now, Luke's directorship career started when he was back in university. He seems to have been the director of no less than 3 companies in the same year while at university. NUS Services Limited, Union Leisure Limited, and SUSU Services Limited. Now, why 3 companies, I hear you ask? Well, those 3 companies apparently were required in order to run Coffee Revolution. Coffee Revolution being the local coffee place just in the university on campus. And it took in something in the region of £1 million in turnover, and I believe something in the region of £400,000 in staffing costs, although it's not clear about how many directors were paid what. But for some reason Luke was a director of these 3 companies, and these 3 companies seem to be a revolving door of directorships for students. I'm sure this is all perfectly normal and just the way that things are done, but it seemed to me like a way of being able to come out of university and saying, I've been a director of X before and therefore get a better job. Again, no suggestion anyone did anything wrong, but it would have been, I'm sure a lot of you would have liked to have been a director of something when at university so that you could come out and get a better job straight away. But nonetheless, there we are. Now, if we fast forward a few years, we find that Luke has a decent LinkedIn profile. He seems to have worked for a number of companies, including Marks and Spencer's. He was seconded out to another company by Marks and Spencer's, and by all accounts, did a very good job. He was also director of a company called Green Cell Limited, that's SELL Limited, who existed for 3 years, have a capital budget of just over £100, and who then wound up. Didn't seem to be much in the way of money going through, just a dormant company. This again is fairly standard if someone is working, for example, as a consultant. They'll set up a limited company and they will charge themselves through that company. Now, the address for that company was 50 Fairlawn in Swindon. He's also been the director of a company called Amplecom Limited. Now, the address given there is 16 Dorkin Business Village. Now, that one's interesting, and I'll tell you a bit more about that later on. But that's his address there, 16 Dorkin Business Village. Now, he was appointed in 19th of January 2016 and gave that as the correspondence address. Shortly afterwards, the business address of Amplecom Limited was moved from 50 Fairlawn, Swindon, to Dorkin Business Village. So previously there was a residential address, which was being used as the company headquarters, and they've now moved into offices. Again, this all seems fairly standard. However, there was another company that Luke was also a director of, which was registered at 30 Fairlawn, Swindon. Now, 50 Fairlawn, Swindon is owned by, as near as I can tell from his Harold Saxon past, Luke's mum and dad. 30 Fairlawn seems to be owned by someone entirely separate. Not sure why, but that's where the company was registered. Now, why is Amplecom interesting? Well, Amplecom was bought as an off-the-shelf company, and it was originally registered by a company called Thaden Secretaries Limited and Thaden Nominees Limited. Now, again, this part here is just for background and for information on how some of the systems work. So this company was set up as a shell company, an empty company. It didn't do anything. And this Thaden Secretaries Limited, which runs out of this residential house in the middle of a street, is the base of thousands upon thousands of companies, one of which was Amplecom, originally registered by what seems to again be Luke's parents, with his mother, I'm guessing, taking on the role of company secretary, and what appears to be perhaps a brother. But again, I don't know the family relationships here. I'm not making any suppositions. I'm purely going by names. That's all I can find. All registered at that same 50 Fairlawn address. So the company then moves to 16 Dorking Business Village in 2016. Now remember, if you will, he ran for Parliament in 2015 in that same seat. So he should have been living in Ochil and Perthshire South at that point, but he wasn't. He was living in Swindon, and he had registered a business at that time. Now we also have, on the 5th of September 2016, he was appointed to the role of director of a company called Tech and the Bean Counters Limited, whose correspondence address is a 50 Fairlawn, Swindon. There's an awful lot of stuff going on at this residential address, but again, this is just how it works. That's just how systems are set up. So he's been a director of a number of different companies. He's had a number of different addresses filed. And if we look on the Electoral Register to see where he was registered, we find that during his student days, he is obviously registered as being in Sheffield, which is perfectly normal. And then for other periods of time, he is registered as being in the Fairlawn Swindon addresses. And he is also noted as being in the Dorking Village address. Now that one's interesting because as far as I'm aware, you're not allowed to put a business address as your address for nomination as a candidate. Now his address is listed as 16 Dorking Village Business Park, but the actual address is Unit 16. Now I can't find a picture of Unit 16, but I can find a picture, because one is available for sale, of Unit 11, which is up here. Now, Unit 11, as you can see, isn't exactly awash with space, and yet, out of that one unit, we have Tech and the Bean Counters and Amplecom. There's also an accountants, DGH Accountants. Now, DGH Accountants were recently bought over by another accountancy firm, and yet still registered and run out of that office. So the accountants for Amplecom were in the same offices as Amplecom, and have now recently been bought over by another company. But wait, there's more. Out of that same building, there is also the shell company of the Dorking Village Business Park, and there are several directors of that who also claim to run other businesses out of this same unit. So in Unit 16 of Dorking Village Business Park in Swindon, there seems to be around 7 or 8 directors listed with their correspondence addresses, at least 4 companies registered at that address, and it also seems to be Luke Graham's registered home address at least one occasion, which as far as I know you're not allowed to do. Now why does all this matter? Well, as I mentioned earlier, he was standing for election in Scotland in 2015. He also stood for election in Scotland in 2017. And on both of those occasions, he listed his address as Woodend House. Woodend House. Woodend House is a Category B listed building in Matherty, in Perth and Kinross. Now, why does that matter? Who cares? Because it's not his address, that's why. Whose address is it, I hear you cry? Well, that address belongs to an Alistair Stirling Fraser Mayor. You may recognise the name, you might not, but he's a former company director of STV and STV North Limited, among other companies. And he also rents out the Stables Cottage, as far as I can tell, rents out to Liz Smith MSP. So Liz Smith MSP is living in the same address as Luke Graham. Anyone to tell me why that is? Okay, I mean, if you're going to parachute a candidate in from another place, surely you would just put their own address. People understand that that the candidate isn't always from the same area. Why would it matter? Well, it would matter because the only address that he would be able to list would be a business address, and you can't list a business address. So is Luke in breach of rules? Yes. Yes, he is. Will it matter? Will it make a blind bit of difference? No. Why? Well, because other than the 10 people who will watch this video and the couple of people on Twitter who noticed, nobody will care. Nobody will look into it. Nobody will bring it up. Nobody will say, hold on a minute, that guy broke the rules. Because that's what Tories do. They break the rules and then they say, rules are meant to be broken. And they move on and say, well, if you keep going on about it, you've got a grievance and you're the one that's got a problem. So Tories will continue to drop in candidates, put incorrect addresses on things. They'll continue to funnel money in wherever they can, because nobody will do anything about it, and because the BBC will just go, independence, 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 until you're sick of the word. And then once you're sick of it, kind of like Big Brother coming up behind and tapping you on the shoulder because you found out that you love Big Brother, that's when your dreams are dead. So, continue to vote Tory, vote for whoever you like. Not really my problem, except it is. Take care, bye-bye.